You know that moment when your life splits into before and after? Mine happened at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, sprinting through the marble lobby of Meridian Consulting with a manila envelope clutched against my chest like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Which, in corporate terms, it basically did. Behind me, security guards were shouting my name. Behind them, Marcus Kane was screaming something about theft and lawsuits and how I'd never work in this industry again. His face was this fascinating shade of purple-red that I'd genuinely never seen on a human being before, like a tomato having an existential crisis. But here's the thing that Marcus didn't know, and this is where it gets really interesting. I wasn't running because I was scared. I wasn't running because I'd been caught doing something wrong. I wasn't even running because I was in trouble. I was running because 8 months of meticulous, methodical, absolutely ruthless planning had just reached its perfect conclusion, and federal investigators were waiting for me in the Starbucks across the street with badges, subpoenas, and the kind of legal firepower that makes corporate executives wake up in cold sweats. Yeah, you heard that right. Federal investigators. As in, the kind of people who don't care how much money you make or how many golf buddies you have or how untouchable you think you are. See, what Marcus Kane fundamentally failed to understand about quiet people like me is that we're not quiet because we're weak. We're not quiet because we're afraid. We're not quiet because we don't have anything to say. We're quiet because we're listening. We're watching. We're collecting data. We're building cases. We're planning your downfall with the same methodical precision that other people use to plan their vacations. And after 8 months of collecting evidence on Marcus Kane, I had enough documentation to end his career, destroy his reputation, torch his professional network, and send him running from the industry he thought he owned like his pants were on fire. But I'm getting way ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you exactly how a quiet little project manager became the woman who brought down one of the most feared, most protected, most absolutely untouchable executives in Chicago. Because trust me, this story has more twists than a pretzel factory, and you're not going to see any of them coming. My name is Sarah Chin, and before all this happened, I was basically a ghost in a business suit. You know that person in every office who gets things done but never gets credit? Who fixes everyone else's disasters but somehow never gets promoted? Who sits in meetings watching less qualified people make catastrophically bad decisions while she takes notes and stays silent because that's what team players do? That was me for exactly 16 years, 2 months and 11 days. But hey, who's counting? I have a master's in business analytics from Northwestern. Graduated summa cum laude. Thank you very much. 3 professional certifications that cost me weekends and evenings for 2 solid years. A track record of turning around failing projects that should have made me absolutely untouchable in this industry. But somehow, I was always the detail person. The one who keeps things running smoothly behind the scenes. The one who gets assigned the thankless, invisible projects that make other people look like strategic geniuses. And honestly, for most of my career, I was completely okay with that arrangement. I believed in this beautiful fantasy called meritocracy. I thought if you worked hard enough, if you were competent enough, if you just kept your head down and consistently delivered excellent work, eventually the system would notice you. Eventually, you'd get your turn. I was wrong about so many things back then. I was wrong about merit mattering more than politics. I was wrong about competence being rewarded over charisma. I was wrong about thinking that doing the right thing would eventually lead to the right outcomes. But the biggest thing I was wrong about, the most fundamentally, catastrophically incorrect assumption I made, was thinking I was powerless. Because what I didn't realize, what nobody realizes about people like me, is that invisible people see everything. We remember everything. We notice patterns that louder people miss, because they're too busy talking to pay attention. And when someone finally pushes us too far, when someone mistakes our quietness for weakness one too many times, well, that's when invisible people become the most dangerous people in the room. March 15th, 2023. Tuesday morning staff meeting. Conference Room B, 9 a.m. sharp. The day I stopped being invisible and started being something much more interesting. I started being strategic. Marcus Kane had been department head for exactly 6 months at this point. 6 months of watching him transform from helpful colleague with leadership potential to corporate psychopath with a corner office. 6 months of watching him systematically target every woman in our department with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. But that Tuesday morning, he made the kind of mistake that changes everything. He went after Sofia Rodriguez. Now, let me tell you about Sofia. She's this absolutely brilliant 26-year-old financial analyst from Houston. First person in her entire extended family to graduate college. Works harder than anyone I've ever met. I'm talking first one in the office, last one to leave, volunteering for every impossible deadline and somehow making it look easy. That morning, Sofia had prepared this incredible presentation on emerging market trends that could have saved our biggest client from making a $1 million mistake. She'd worked on it for 3 weeks, cross-referenced data from 7 different sources, built predictive models that were honestly works of art. Marcus didn't even let her finish the first slide. "This analysis is garbage," he screamed, loud enough that people in 3 other conference rooms stopped their meetings to figure out where the shouting was coming from. Absolute garbage. Did you even look at the data before you wasted everyone's time with this presentation? And I watched Sofia's face just crumble. Watched 16 years of building confidence evaporate in real time. Watched her hands start shaking as she tried to shuffle through her perfectly organized notes to find whatever imaginary mistake Marcus was talking about. But here's what really got to me, what really lit that slow-burning fuse in my brain. While Marcus was screaming at Sofia, while she was fighting back tears, while everyone else in that room was suddenly finding their laptops absolutely fascinating and pretending this public humiliation wasn't happening right in front of them. My phone buzzed. Text message from Maya Chen, my best friend in the company. "Can we talk? It's about Marcus. It's urgent." And that's when I knew. Maya Chen doesn't text during meetings unless someone is literally dying. Maya Chen doesn't ask to talk unless something is seriously, catastrophically wrong. Maya Chen is the strongest person I know. She once presented quarterly projections with a broken wrist and didn't mention it until after the client signed. If Marcus Kane had finally broken Maya Chen, then he wasn't just a bad manager anymore. He wasn't just someone having a rough transition to leadership. He wasn't just a guy who needed better communication training. He was a serial abuser who was systematically destroying talented women, and somebody had to stop him before he destroyed anyone else. I looked up from my phone, and for the first time in 16 years, I wasn't thinking about staying invisible. I wasn't thinking about keeping my head down and hoping someone else would handle the problem. I was thinking about how to destroy Marcus Kane so completely that he'd never be able to hurt another woman again. That night, I did something I'd never done before in my entire career. I started keeping records. Not just notes or casual observations, but real, systematic, legally bulletproof documentation. The kind that would hold up in federal court. See, I have this thing about patterns. Always have. In elementary school, I was the weird kid who could predict which teachers would give pop quizzes based on how they arranged their desk supplies and whether they wore their serious shoes. In college, I built statistical models for fun because other people's data problems were like puzzles I couldn't resist solving. In my career, I've made my entire reputation by seeing problems before they become disasters, by identifying the early warning signs that everyone else misses. And Marcus Kane? Marcus Kane was a 5-alarm disaster wrapped in an expensive suit, and somehow nobody else could see it coming. It started small, almost academic. The way he'd interrupt women in meetings, but let men finish their sentences, I started timing the interruptions. How his feedback to female employees was always delivered with this particular condescending tone that made their contributions sound inadequate. I found a way to document tone and body language. The fact that every woman who worked directly under him either transferred out or started having mysterious performance issues within 3 months. I pulled the HR files and built a statistical model that was frankly damning. But then I started digging deeper, and that's when things got really interesting. January 12th, Marcus screamed at intern Jessica Park for eavesdropping, when she was literally just standing outside his office waiting to ask a question about the project he'd assigned her. I documented the witnesses: David Chin, Monica Reyes, Thomas Anderson. Jessica filed an HR complaint. The complaint was resolved with a public apology that Marcus never actually gave and a private counseling session that Jessica later told me consisted of him threatening her evaluation if she caused any more disruptions. January 26th, during our all-hands Zoom meeting, Marcus publicly humiliated Sophia over her quarterly projections, claiming her numbers were wildly optimistic and not based in reality. Here's the kicker: I ran Sophia's numbers myself that night. Her projections were not only accurate, they were conservative. Marcus had been working with outdated data for 3 weeks and was too arrogant to admit his mistake. February 8th, Marcus accused Priya Patel of trying to crash the system with her remote work efficiency report. The report actually identified 17 security vulnerabilities that could have cost the company hundreds of thousands in data breaches. Instead of thanking her for potentially saving us from a lawsuit, he wrote her up for insubordination and exceeding her authority. By February, I had 12 documented incidents with witnesses, times, dates, and corroborating evidence. By March, I had 14 women willing to go on record with their experiences. By April, I had email chains proving that Marcus wasn't just targeting women randomly. He was deliberately, systematically trying to force out anyone who might challenge his authority or expose his incompetence. But what I was really building, what I was carefully and methodically constructing with the patience of someone who builds ships in bottles, was a bulletproof case that would be impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, impossible to sweep under the corporate rug, and impossible for anyone, no matter how powerful, to protect him from. And Marcus? Marcus Kane was still walking around like he owned the place, completely oblivious to the fact that the quiet little project manager was building the trap that would end his career. Coffee shop across from our building, Thursday afternoon. Maya sitting across from me, looking like she hadn't slept in a week. Dark circles under her eyes, hands shaking slightly as she stirred sugar into coffee she wasn't going to drink. "Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what to do anymore. Yesterday, he screamed at me for 20 minutes over that system alert from last October. Last October, Sarah. He blamed me for something that happened before I even worked in his department, and when I tried to explain that it wasn't my project, he told me I was making excuses and failing to take responsibility for my team's mistakes." I slid a small digital recorder across the table, the kind lawyers use for depositions. "Maya, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. All of it. Every detail you can remember. And I need you to know that you're not the first person to sit across from me and tell me this exact story." Her eyes went wide. "What do you mean?" That's when I told her everything. About the documentation project. About the patterns I'd identified. About the fact that I'd been building a case that could protect not just her, but every woman Marcus had terrorized, humiliated, or tried to force out of the company. And I watched Maya's expression change in real time. From hopeless to confused to hopeful to absolutely, righteously furious. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since the day I realized that Marcus Kane mistakes kindness for weakness, mistakes professionalism for passivity, and mistakes quiet for powerless." But here's what Marcus Kane fundamentally didn't understand about women in corporate environments, especially women who've been underestimated their entire careers. We talk to each other. We share information. We build networks that are invisible to men like him because they're too arrogant to think we're worth paying attention to. And when one of us starts collecting evidence against a serial workplace abuser, Word spreads through those networks faster than gossip about executive affairs. My phone lit up with notifications that evening. A private group chat I'd created called Documentation Project, 15 women, all with stories, all with proof, all ready to speak up the moment someone gave them a safe, protected way to do it. Sophia from accounting, still dealing with anxiety attacks every time she had to present to leadership. Priya from IT, who'd started seeing a therapist because she thought she was bad at her job. Jessica, who'd transferred to marketing specifically to get away from Marcus. Monica from HR, who couldn't officially help but could certainly point us toward the right policies, procedures, and legal precedents. 15 women, all comparing notes for the first time, all realizing that what they'd experienced wasn't their fault, wasn't about their performance, wasn't about their attitude or their competence or their failure to fit in with company culture. It was about Marcus Kane being a predator who had found his perfect hunting ground. And Marcus? Marcus was so busy enjoying his power trips, so intoxicated by his ability to make talented people feel small, so convinced that his position made him untouchable, that he never noticed the network forming around him. Never realized that every woman he'd humiliated was now comparing notes with every other woman he'd targeted. Never considered that his pattern of abuse was being documented, cross-referenced, and verified by people who understood exactly how to build an airtight legal case. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating quiet people who know how to organize. April 2023. The announcement that changed everything and handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy Marcus Kane completely. Marcus gets promoted to Chief Compliance Officer. Let that sink in for a moment. The man who was systematically harassing, intimidating, and discriminating against women got put in charge of investigating workplace harassment complaints, which meant that every complaint against him would have to go through him. Blake Morrison, our CEO, called it giving Marcus additional responsibilities to help him grow into senior leadership. I called it the most beautiful example of corporate irony I've ever witnessed, and the last nail in Marcus Kane's professional coffin. Because what Marcus didn't know, what Blake Morrison didn't know, what nobody in corporate leadership knew, was that I'd already found a way around that convenient little conflict of interest. Elena Rodriguez, employment attorney with 15 years of experience specializing in workplace discrimination cases. The kind of lawyer who takes on cases that other attorneys won't touch because they're too complicated, too political, or too likely to result in powerful people getting very, very angry. I walked into her downtown office on a Tuesday morning with 8 bankers' boxes of documentation, spreadsheets with dates, times, witnesses, and corroborating evidence. Audio recordings of Marcus's tirades that I'd legally captured in one-party Consent, Illinois. Email chains proving that company leadership knew about his behavior and chose to promote him instead of addressing it. Written testimony from 15 victims detailing a pattern of discrimination that was so systematic it could have been a case study in how not to manage people. Elena looked at my evidence for exactly 47 minutes. I know because I timed it. Then she looked at me with the kind of smile that makes corporate lawyers wake up in cold sweats and said 3 words that changed everything. We have him. That's when my phone rang. Blake Morrison calling personally. Sarah, I understand there have been some concerns raised about Marcus's management style. I want you to know that we take all employee feedback seriously, and we're going to address this situation internally. We appreciate your dedication to the company, but I think it would be better for everyone involved if we could handle this matter quietly and professionally. I let it go to voicemail. Showed Elena the missed call and the transcript of his message. Too late for quiet, I said. Too late for internal. Too late for professional courtesy. And that's when Elena Rodriguez filed simultaneous federal complaints with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Labor, and the Illinois Human Rights Commission, along with a civil lawsuit that would make Marcus Kane and Meridian Consulting wish they'd never heard my name. Marcus Kane was about to discover that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're too important, too protected, and too valuable to face them. Thursday, November 16th, 2023, 9 a.m. The day Marcus Kane learned that quiet people can be the most dangerous people of all, and that 16 years of underestimating Sarah Chen was about to cost him everything. I'm sitting in the lobby, pretending to work on my laptop, but really watching through the conference room glass as two federal investigators in dark suits walk into Blake Morrison's office, where Marcus is sitting with his usual arrogant confidence, probably expecting another congratulatory meeting about his exceptional leadership during challenging times. "Mr. Kane," says Special Agent Williams, flashing her badge, "I'm with the Department of Labor. We're conducting an investigation into allegations of systematic workplace discrimination and harassment. You have the right to have an attorney present during this interview." And I watch Marcus's face change. Watch the color drain from his cheeks like someone pulled a plug. Watch his mouth open and close like a fish suddenly realizing it's not in water anymore. Watch the exact moment he realizes that all those women he'd terrorized, all those complaints he dismissed, all those victims he'd assumed would just quietly disappear and find jobs somewhere else. We hadn't disappeared. We'd organized. We'd documented. We'd built a case. And we'd handed it to people with badges and subpoena power who didn't care about his revenue numbers or his golf buddies or his protection from Blake Morrison. The investigation took 6 hours and 43 minutes. I know because I stayed in that lobby the entire time, watching Marcus's world end in real time. By hour 2, he'd stopped denying the allegations and started trying to minimize them. Miscommunications, he called them. Management style differences. By hour 3, he was trying to blame everyone else. The women were oversensitive. HR was poorly managed. The company culture was too politically correct. By hour 4, he was demanding to know who had orchestrated this witch hunt and threatening to sue for defamation, harassment, and conspiracy. By hour 5, he was being informed that his employment was terminated effective immediately, that his company credit cards were being canceled, that his access to all systems was being revoked, and that criminal charges were being considered by the U.S. Attorney's Office. But the most beautiful moment, the moment that made 8 months of preparation, documentation, and strategic planning worth every sleepless night, was when Agent Williams asked him if he had anything to say about the systematic pattern of abuse detailed in our 847-page complaint. Marcus looked directly at me through the conference room glass. His face was gray, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and his hands were shaking. And with this completely defeated, broken expression, he said the words that I will remember for the rest of my life. "I never thought she was paying attention." That's the problem with people like Marcus Kane. They mistake quiet for weak. They mistake preparation for passivity. They mistake professional courtesy for powerlessness. They think that because someone doesn't fight back immediately, publicly, and dramatically, it means they won't fight back at all. They're catastrophically, expensively wrong. 6 months later, Marcus Kane's LinkedIn profile disappeared completely. Blake Morrison took early retirement after his own investigation revealed a pattern of enabling abusive behavior that went back years. Meridian Consulting paid a 7-figure settlement to avoid a public trial, implemented new harassment reporting procedures, hired an independent ombudsman, and instituted mandatory bias training for all leadership. 15 women got justice. The company culture changed overnight. Other victims of workplace abuse throughout the industry started coming forward because they'd seen that the system could actually work when people were willing to document, organize, and fight back strategically instead of suffering in silence. And me? I got promoted to Director of Employee Relations with a salary increase that made all those years of being undervalued feel like ancient history. I now spend my days making sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. I create the policies that protect people. I train the managers who used to ignore problems. I investigate the complaints that used to get buried. When someone comes to me and says, I'm being harassed, they get protection, resources, and justice instead of excuses, delays, and retaliation. But the most important thing I learned, the thing I want everyone watching this to understand, to really absorb, is that you are never as powerless as they want you to believe. Even when it feels like the system is designed to protect your abusers, even when it seems like speaking up will only make things worse, even when everyone tells you to just keep your head down, document nothing, say nothing, and hope that someone else will eventually fix the problem. You have more power than you think. More power than they want you to realize. You have the power to document everything. You have the power to find allies and build networks. You have the power to research the right legal resources and advocacy organizations. You have the power to choose your moment, build your case, and strike when victory is not just possible but inevitable. Because bullies like Marcus Kane, abusers like Blake Morrison, and broken systems like the one at Meridian Consulting count on their victims feeling isolated, powerless, and afraid. They rely on silence. They depend on people giving up. They need you to believe that they're untouchable, that the system will always protect them, that fighting back is pointless and career suicide. But here's the secret they desperately don't want you to know. They're only untouchable until someone decides to touch them. They're only protected until someone builds a case they can't ignore or dismiss. They're only powerful until someone more prepared, more patient, more strategic, and more absolutely determined decides it's time to end their reign of terror. And sometimes, often actually, that someone is the quiet one they never bothered to notice. My name is Sarah Chin. I used to be invisible. Now I'm the woman who brought down Marcus Kane, changed an entire corporate culture, and proved that quiet people aren't weak people. We're just people who prefer to win strategically rather than lose dramatically. And if you're dealing with your own Marcus Kane right now, if you're feeling powerless and alone, and like nothing you do will ever matter, if you think that staying quiet is the same thing as staying safe, remember my story. Because the best revenge isn't getting mad. The best revenge is getting organized, getting evidence, getting allies, and getting justice. If this story inspired you to document everything and fight back strategically, hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done differently? And remember, you're never as powerless as they want you to believe.